Katie Walker and I'm a Policy Officer at Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue. Welcome to our 2020 NAIDOC Week event. I'm excited to explore the theme of Always Was, Always Will Be. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge that I am recording this event on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I would also further acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands we gather today. I pay my deepest respect to elders past, present and emerging, especially during NAIDOC Week, and celebrate the diversity of all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders, especially those within Greater Western Sydney. I would like to briefly introduce our speakers now before we begin. Auntie Jenny Ebsworth. Auntie Jenny is an utmost respected and valued elder of Western Sydney, and we are truly privileged to have her with us today. She has made an incredible impact to Western Sydney, especially fighting against drug use and its devastating impacts. I would also like to welcome Blake Tatafu and Renee Thompson from Kimberwali, both future leaders of the West. And finally, Lakshmi Logasam from New South Wales Premier Cabinet and Joshua Lee from Deloitte. Both are members of the Dialogue's Generation West Network and thriving young leaders of Western Sydney. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Katie.
So first, I'd like to begin by asking Auntie Jenny, could you tell us a bit about the history of NAIDOC and what it means to you?
Well, first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Jenny Ebsworth. You've already given me a brief introduction. I'm a Murrawari Nimba woman from Brewarrina, and I've come to live in this country, the Darug people, in March 1980, so I've been down here quite a few years. To me, NAIDOC is very important. It's about us coming together as a people to celebrate our heritage and our culture, getting people together. It's really important. I just love NAIDOC. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm really keen today to explore the theme of Always Was and Always Will Be. Renee and Blake, would you be able to share your input and your feelings and towards the theme this year?
Sure. I'll also do the same. I'll introduce myself. My name is Blake Tatafu. I'm a Wiradjuri Dungutting man, where my family comes from Kempsey and Trangie on my mum's side. I was born and raised on Darug country in Penrith. And NAIDOC to me it's one of those pivotal points of the year where, I know for my family, we always have that circle. We're always ready to get amongst all the events that are happening across our communities and really rejoice in who we are as Aboriginal people. We're proud every day, but NAIDOC Week to me feels like it's this feeling that we get to share with everyone, how resilient, how strong and how proud we all are as Aboriginal people, and be able to share that with all our brothers and sisters and those who are not also Aboriginal. And it's a beautiful week. I'm a little bit cheeky because I also love NAIDOC Week because, traditionally NAIDOC is in July, and I was born during NAIDOC Week, so I have a little bit of a kinship to the week itself as well. But thank you.
So my name is Renee Thompson. I'm a proud Wiradjuri woman. So my family and I stem from a Rambi Mission Cowra in the Riverina region of New South Wales, but I was born and raised in Mount Druitt and the surrounding suburbs of Western Sydney, where I still currently reside and work.
Lakshmi or Josh, what were your sort of feelings towards this, and have you felt what Blake has just kind of reiterated?
100%. I think there are so many new migrants who come to Australia that can really resonate with that trauma and suffering that our Native people feel. Also, connection to land for a lot of cultures is a big thing. In my culture, worship of land and worship of nature is a big thing. The Juukan Gorge incident is something that really resonates with people that come from cultures like myself to our absolute core. So there are lots of shared emotions, and I think on reconciliation and constitutional recognition, I think I can't speak for everyone of our generation, but I can speak for myself and say that, that to me is kind of the foundation for modern Australia. We have to draw a line in the sand and say that, this is our history, this is our culture, and recognising this is how we move forward as a nation. Otherwise, we're going to spend generations tiptoeing around the truths of our history, and that's not productive. So I think it's fundamental. It's important for us. It's accepted as a way of moving.
So, Katie, I want to go back and speak about what reconciliation means to me as a young person in this community. The term reconciliation, we really need to understand what that actually means, and to reconcile is about two people coming together to acknowledge what's happened and to move forward from something. As Aboriginal people, we are constantly coming to the table and coming to meet with non-Aboriginal people to discuss around how we can walk together within a harmonious environment and a country. But I think reconciliation for me, like, it's just another word that gets chucked around that is quite tokenistic. Like, what are we reconciling over? How can we reconcile? And how can this word be such a buzzword for our people when, you just have to walk out the road here through it, and our people are still living in poverty? But we shouldn't have to keep fighting over our country and a land which is ours, which was never ceded. And that's one thing that I think all people of Australia and within Australia, whether you're born here or you come here with your family, it's something that we need to acknowledge and something that needs to be taught. So for me, I think reconciliation is about genuinely sitting down and being honest with everyone and talking about the brutal history of this country.
Yeah, absolutely. And you commented on truth telling and things like that, and things that they really did intensively in places like South Africa and things like that, is they have such a huge focus on truth telling. And when you go there, the history of South Africa it's in your face, and they are open about it. And that was something I found in huge contrast to living in Australia, is because we don't have this factor of truth telling, and it's quite hidden, isn't it? So when we come to events like NAIDOC Week, I totally understand how you've kind of opened up about that and have that opinion of it, because we don't really have that seen truth here. It's much very so hidden.
Yeah, and I think it's just evident. And just to say, Katie, like, one of my friends is a history teacher in high school, and they've titled our warriors, so Windradine, as a terrorist land. You only need to look at that. And, like, for people who have been through the education system here in Australia, we don't get taught nothing about our culture. Like, we get taught about all these other international cultures, and we get taught all these other international languages. But why aren't we getting taught our language, and why aren't we getting taught our culture? Like, that's what we should be really asking, is reasoning behind it. And I think that's where we'll start to be able to, get the answers.
Absolutely. And education is such a powerful tool when you think about all of our own upbringing and, my experience in primary school and high school. And I didn't know what NAIDOC Week was until later on in my school life, which it explains exactly what you said, and the power that education also could have to get to that reconcile stage that you've commented on. We seem to have lost Josh, but that's fine. We'll continue on. I suppose, I'll go back to my previous question, just speaking about change and areas within where we live in Greater Western Sydney. Lakshmi, did you want to share where some areas of change that you see that are needed or are essential? Or did you want to share your opinions on that?
Yeah, I think what Renee said, it really resonates. There is a big piece around education and visible celebration of our identity and the truth of our identity and history. And I think Greater Western Sydney, particularly key areas of first settlement, have a very deep history of trauma that is not really spoken about at all, and that needs to be more visible, so that there is an acknowledgement of history, but that acknowledgement then forms the foundation of being able to celebrate your identity. And I don't just mean Indigenous Australians, I mean our identity as a nation, So yes, a huge amount of leadership in the area of our history and our education I don't know how long we need to keep talking about that. That just needs to happen, you know. So acknowledgement of history, accurate, an education system that accurately reflects who we are as a people, and then clear visual representation around our cities, around our spaces, that, you know, it forms those talking points. I was in down the street and was able to see my culture visually represented in a way that was honest to my culture. There is a huge sense of pride and confidence that comes from that. So yeah, those are our first steps. They were our first steps way back when. So let's get on to it.
Absolutely, definitely. I guess my next sort of question, Renee, you commented on the underemployment that is so staggering, especially in Mount Druitt, and something that the dialogue with Kim Mullally we're going to be working on is looking at procurement policies and their impact, and looking at employment within Greater Western Sydney. So I suppose my next comment is, what are you seeing within the community in regards to procurement policies and employment, and what is there improvement, or what do you think are the issues that are still occurring within that sector?
In regards to employment and procurement of Aboriginal businesses or Aboriginal community members within Western Sydney, Mount Druitt, we just have to draw our attention to the Western Sydney Airport and the Aerotropolis, and really look at the stats around how many local Aboriginal people were employed for that project and are currently still unemployed and not engaged in the project, which is just in our backyard. I think we have a community here in Western Sydney, and especially with the Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue, we're talking about the booming economy within Western Sydney. There is a huge issue and a huge underlying issue of not engaging appropriately and not ensuring that, not just consulting, because I'm sick of Aboriginal people being consulted, but Aboriginal people being actively engaged in the processes from the get-go. So from the planning stages of when, these big businesses are going to come in and these big construction companies are going to come in, that is where we need Aboriginal people at the centre of the employment opportunities for Western Sydney. I just think it's kind of non-existent where the reporting measures are, or how we actually measure and evaluate these businesses who get these big contracts within Western Sydney, but aren't obliged to really engage with Aboriginal people and get them involved in the employment opportunities. So I think just from my experiences, working in the employment sector as well, it's kind of like a blanket approach around, businesses can win these massive multi-million dollar contracts, but there's a 3% procurement of employment, which they can work around that, where there aren't really any reporting mechanisms that actually hold these businesses accountable, and to ensure that local Aboriginal people are being told and are being made available to these local opportunities within our community. And I think people really need to understand that if one person, Aboriginal family, gets a job, that potentially has the impact on that whole family and can create that generational change, which we need to see now in our community. Aunt and I were just talking about it now, about young people, and we have a lot of our young people who is kind of going off the radar a bit, and that is because of the intergenerational trauma which is continuing to be inflicted on our young people. So I think there's a real opportunity. I know there's a real opportunity with employment and procurement policies out here in Western Sydney to ensure that we do create that generational change.
Can I just say also, like a lot of the resettlement scheme which was set in the 60s, where a lot of people came from different countries, out west, along the coast, all over Riverina, to make our home here in Western Sydney, Darra country. And we, some of our kids didn't get that education that they should have. And that was because I believe it goes back to racism. A lot of non-Indigenous understand what we, like Renee said, with the intergenerational trauma, we still have people that feel no hope in our community. And that's why our kids are failing today, These kids aren't going through school. Some of them aren't even going to go to education, and some of them are going to go down the road, you know, with the drug cycle and alcoholism and being incarcerated, you know. So when they talk about reconciliation, you know, they're not even taking any of that into account. Our people, they tried to, you know, in the past, they tried to put, you know, genocide, all of that sort of stuff to get rid of us, but they're doing it slowly through the nothing being introduced into our communities, you know. So, you know, we're a people of the land, you know, we live good lives, and this is where we are today. And, you know, this conversation that you're having now, that should have been a long time ago, you know.
Yeah.
Start listening to our people and have that, you know, but the trouble with Australia, it's got no respect for its First Nation people. And without respect, you've got no...
Just asking about the Indigenous procurement policies, and Deloitte has actually written a report about them. And the report kind of commented on how they weren't implemented. It commented on what Renee said about how the percentage is quite easy to reach or mask in another way. And it also commented on Indigenous businesses not actually meeting the specifics to become an Indigenous business, but generating these sort of contracts. Did you have any comments to add on that piece of work done by Deloitte?
Yeah, absolutely. Dropping off some technical issues. But yeah, so the Indigenous procurement policy, which was introduced by the government in 2015, with an idea to support and grow Indigenous enterprises and entrepreneurship. Part of it, they wanted to have 3% of contracts go to Indigenous businesses. And I think what Auntie Jenny may have referred to before was cladding. So, yeah, which is when businesses meet all the requirements to qualify as an Indigenous business and win these contracts. However, by nature, they're probably not Indigenous owned or Indigenous businesses that support Indigenous communities and workers. From the procurement policies, there were also other issues such as access to real employment and growth opportunities. And from the paper you were referring to, Katie, they stated that although the government was meeting their 3% target of providing these contracts to Indigenous communities, however, a lot of the contracts were of low value, so under $10,000. It was over 50% was under $10,000, and as a result of the contracts being of low value, it means there's a lot of uncertainty for the businesses. The timeframes of the work is probably shorter as well, and they're also unable to hire Indigenous workers. And so, while the numbers may seem like it's going well, I think it's far from perfect.
Yeah.
There's still a lot to do. It's not, they can't simply just create a policy and trust that it will work out itself. I think a lot more support and work needs to be done to ensure that it is achieving what it was created to achieve, and that is to support Indigenous enterprises and entrepreneurship. That may, in the paper, one of the recommendations from the 2019 paper that Deloitte had written, one of the recommendations was to value. So rather than just having a number and trying to hit that number, also thinking about value.
What it's giving to the community and things like that. Definitely. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Blake, was there anything that you wanted to add?
I wanted to ask Josh a question.
Yeah.
I haven't read this paper, but was there ever a look or an insight as to how the procurement processes with Aboriginal people, like how they were, what these organisations, what these businesses had to do, or how they engage with Aboriginal people? Because that's what we were kind of just talking about before as being the biggest gap, is that there's these opportunities that are created or that are there, but the question still looms: are Aboriginal people in our communities really being engaged to have these opportunities? And are these businesses being held to account as to how they engage?
Yeah, I can't say that I know the full details on the processes and how it works, but from the paper they did engage. So this paper where they evaluated the policies each year, they did survey and engage with the Indigenous community to ask them how they felt the policy was doing.
Okay.
And what was that feedback?
Sorry?
And what was that feedback?
Yes, one of the feedbacks was that they, in terms of communication, education, that was an issue. Obviously, with these contracts and the documents they have to go through, it's not always clear, even for, you know, the larger population. It could get quite confusing and difficult to understand the procurement policies and processes. And so that was also an area that they found was an issue. Also in remote communities, where sometimes English might actually be a second language, and they have the Indigenous languages. And again, in these documents, a lot of legal terminologies and wording that doesn't suit who it was created for, which was raised as an issue, and an area that not just government but also businesses, I guess, has to work on.
Yeah,
I think, Katie, sorry, just to jump in. I think when we talk about the IPP policy or all these new policies that have been implemented by government, like just hearing you speak, Josh, and I know that Auntie Jenny would know about her people in Western Sydney, and I know about the people that I work with in Western Sydney. It's just the same conversation that we keep having, whether it's across employment, justice, education, health, housing. You throw it at us and it'll all go back to the same thing. It's institutional racism and the deliberate obstacles which stand in front of Aboriginal people that hold us back from succeeding. As Aunt said, it's planned, and I feel like the only way that we're actually going to see these outcomes and Aboriginal people will reap the benefits of our land and, you know, the opportunities that come from the land is by engaging with Aboriginal people from the get-go and not talking to us after the fact. Or, you know, Josh, you just said it around the legal terms and how hard it is for wider Australian individuals and communities to actually understand the IPP policies. I wouldn't even understand that. And, you know, I think like all of it just seems like it's so strategic to continue to ensure Aboriginal people just don't succeed. And, you know, these things look really good on a high level. And don't get me wrong, I would say that a lot of the intention would mean well. But when it comes down to the crux of it, it just doesn't speak for its actions. And I just think we need to be able to ensure that we can get rid of the deliberate obstacles and the roadblocks which stand in front of us as Aboriginal people, because we will just never see the benefits of these things that we even want to endorse as Aboriginal people. Any thoughts on?
No, that's true. It's just listening to that, you know, there is the roadblocks and setting us up to fail all the time. So, you know, we're never going to, you know, achieve. How can we be reconciled, you know, just listening to something like that, and you can go away and make a decision and, you know, and Aboriginal people not even aware, and all of these things that are Aboriginal people should be the first in line, you know, because this is the land of the Aboriginal people, and like the theme says, always was and always.
Yeah, and I think what's resonated with a lot that we're saying, have been saying today, is about the lack of good communication and the need for better education as well. I'm just aware of the time, guys, so I think we're going to have to come to our end of our wonderful discussion now. I would really love to thank Auntie Jenny for donating your time so generously. It was such a privilege to have you with us, and the dialogue and all of the panel is very, very grateful that you were able to join us today, and thank you for all the work you're doing for Greater Western Sydney. To Blake and Renee, thank you for joining us and for all the wonderful work you're doing through Kimberwali. It's a pleasure to be in partners with you, and I'm looking forward to all the and for the Gen West guys, Lakshmi and Josh, thanks for joining us. I think it was really important, and it was really instilled by Blake that we have a diverse perspective with us today and a representation of really what Western Sydney is. And I'm really grateful that you're all able to join us. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.